The bruise on her cheekbone had turned a sickly yellow-green, but the purple fingerprints around her wrist were fresh. Margaret stood in the cereal aisle of the upscale grocery store, her oversized sunglasses failing to hide what everyone pretended not to see. Her hands trembled as she reached for the box of Cheerios, the kind her kids loved. And that's when she felt it. Someone actually looking, not past her, not through her, at her. A woman in a sharp navy suit, briefcase in hand, eyes filled not with pity, but with recognition, with rage. That moment, that single locked gaze between strangers, would be the crack that shattered everything Margaret had spent 15 years building, or rather, surviving. Margaret Chen had once been a woman who laughed easily, whose smile could light up a room at the advertising firm where she'd worked. But that was 20 pounds and 3 children ago. That was before Daniel made her believe her body was a betrayal, before love became a prison with marble countertops and a mortgage she couldn't escape. This is a story about a woman who learned that silence has a price, and that sometimes justice wears a power suit and refuses to look away. If you believe that no one deserves to be broken by the person who promised to love them, hit that like button and follow this channel. Because what you're about to hear is how Margaret Chen stopped apologizing for taking up space and started taking back her life. Now let me tell you how it all began. In a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs where screaming was always followed by silence, and shame was served at every meal, Margaret's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. as it had every morning for the past decade. She silenced it quickly. Any noise that woke Daniel before 7 a.m. meant his day started angry, and she'd learned to move through the house like a ghost in those early hours. Her body ached as she pulled herself from bed, the deep bruise on her ribs making her wince. She caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror and looked away immediately, a habit so ingrained she no longer questioned it. The woman staring back was 42, but looked older, her dark hair streaked with premature grey, her eyes perpetually tired. She'd gained 60 pounds since marrying Daniel 15 years ago, most of it during and after her 3 pregnancies. Each pound, Daniel reminded her constantly, was another reason he couldn't stand to touch her anymore. Margaret splashed cold water on her face and began the morning routine. Breakfast for 3 children, lunch boxes prepared, Daniel's coffee exactly how he liked it, black, scalding hot, in the blue mug. Her world had shrunk to the walls of their beautiful prison in downtown Seattle. The house was a showpiece. Exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, furniture that cost more than her parents' first car. Daniel was a successful tech executive pulling in $500,000 a year, and he never let her forget that every bite of food she ate, every piece of clothing she wore, every toy their children played with came from his money. Margaret had quit her job when their oldest, Emma, was born. It had seemed reasonable at the time. Daniel's career was taking off. Someone needed to be home with the baby, and he'd promised they were partners in this. But partnership, she'd learned, was just another word that meant different things to different people. Now Emma was 14, Mason was 11, and little Lily was 8. They were her whole world, her reason for breathing, and the chains that kept her trapped in a marriage that had curdled into something toxic. The antagonist didn't hide in shadows or disguise his cruelty. Daniel Chen wore expensive suits and smiled for the neighbors and coached Mason's little league team with enthusiasm that made other parents think he was father of the year. He was 45, handsome in that distinguished way that came with grey temples and gym-sculpted shoulders, charming at dinner parties, generous with business associates. But behind closed doors, he was a man who had convinced his wife that her body was disgusting, that she was lucky he hadn't left her, that no one else would ever want someone who looked like her. "You used to be beautiful," he'd say, running his eyes over her with undisguised contempt. "I married a woman who took care of herself. What happened to you?" The questions were rhetorical, designed to cut, and they did their job every single time. The microaggressions had started small, almost invisible. A comment about her second helping at dinner, a comparison to his co-worker's wife who still looked amazing after 2 kids. The way he'd turn away when she undressed, making sure she saw his disgust. He stopped touching her except in anger, stopped saying her name except as a prelude to criticism. When they went out, which was rare, he'd introduce her as "my wife Margaret," with a tone that added invisible quotation marks around the word, as if he was acknowledging some unfortunate technicality. At his company Christmas party 3 years ago, she'd overheard him tell a colleague, "Yeah, the wife let herself go. You know how it is." He'd said it like she was a car he'd stopped maintaining, an investment gone bad. She'd spent the rest of that evening in the bathroom, crying silently while holiday music played through the walls. But comments evolved into something darker. 2 years ago, Daniel had started having affairs, or rather, he'd stopped hiding them. He picked women who were Margaret's opposite, thin, young, usually blonde. He'd come home smelling of unfamiliar perfume and dare her to say something with his eyes. When she finally worked up the courage to confront him, he'd laughed. "What did you expect? You think I'm supposed to be satisfied with you? Look at yourself, Margaret, you're not even trying anymore." The words had hit like fists, and she'd learned that silence hurt less than speaking up. He began bringing his affairs into their lives more openly. Phone calls during dinner that he'd take in front of her. Text messages that made him smile in ways she couldn't remember him smiling at her. Once, she found hotel receipts in his jacket pocket and he'd shrugged. "At least someone wants to be with me, unlike my wife, who can't even push away from the table." The first time he hit her was on a Tuesday. She remembered because it was trash day and she'd forgotten to take the bins out to the curb. He'd come home to find them still sitting by the garage, and something in him had snapped. "You can't even handle the simplest fucking task," he'd screamed, backing her into the kitchen. "What do you even do all day? Eat?" His hand had connected with her face so fast she hadn't seen it coming, the sharp crack echoing off the granite countertops. She'd stood there stunned, her cheek burning, tasting blood where her tooth had cut her lip. Daniel had looked at his hand like it belonged to someone else, then at her and said, "Look what you made me do." Then he'd left, slamming the door, and she'd sunk to the floor and cried until her throat was raw. The next morning, he'd acted like nothing had happened, and she'd let him, because what else could she do? The hitting became more frequent after that first time, always where the bruises wouldn't show, her ribs, her back, her upper arms. Once, he grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against the wall, his face inches from hers, spitting words about how pathetic she was, how she should be grateful he hadn't thrown her out on the street. "No one would want you," he hissed. "You'd end up homeless, and the kids would be better off without you anyway. You're useless, a burden." She'd gasped for air, black spots dancing in her vision, and when he finally let go, she'd collapsed. He'd stepped over her body like she was a piece of furniture in his way. The children, thank God, had been at school. She always made sure the children were at school or asleep or distracted when Daniel's rage found its target. Margaret had memorized the pattern of her own shame. After each incident, she'd shower for too long, scrubbing her skin until it hurt, trying to wash away the feeling of his hands, his words, his hatred. She'd apply makeup carefully, choose clothes strategically, rehearse explanations she never had to give because no one asked. "I'm clumsy," she'd prepared to say. "I walked into a door. I fell down the stairs." The lies were ready, polished smooth by repetition in her mind, but nobody in her life looked closely enough to require them. Her parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago. Her only sibling lived in London, and the friends from her old life had drifted away after she'd cancelled too many coffee dates, declined too many invitations, made too many excuses. Daniel had isolated her methodically, and she'd let it happen because fighting took energy she didn't have anymore. Inside her own mind, a war raged constantly. Part of her knew this wasn't normal, wasn't okay, wasn't what marriage was supposed to be. That part whispered that she deserved better, that her daughters were watching and learning what to accept from men, that her son was learning how to treat women. But a louder part, the part Daniel had carefully cultivated over 15 years, said she was worthless without him, that she'd failed as a wife by gaining weight, failed as a woman by not staying attractive, failed as a partner by not meeting his needs. The math seemed impossible. She had no money of her own, no recent work experience, no way to support 3 kids in one of the most expensive cities in America. Who would hire a 42-year-old former advertising associate who hadn't worked in 14 years? How could she afford a place to live on minimum wage? What lawyer would take her case pro bono? The questions paralyzed her, kept her frozen in place. But there was a memory, small and persistent, that sometimes surfaced when the fear felt overwhelming. She'd been 7 years old, watching her mother stand up to a neighbor who'd been bullying Margaret on the playground. Her mother, all 5'2" of her, had marched right up to this man who towered over her and said, "You have 2 choices. You can teach your son to keep his hands to himself, or you can explain to the police why a grown man thinks it's acceptable to let children hurt other children." The man had backed down, stammering apologies. Afterward, her mother had knelt down, looked Margaret in the eyes and said, "Nobody gets to make you small. Not ever. You remember that." Margaret had forgotten for a long time, buried that lesson under years of Daniel's conditioning, but sometimes, late at night, her mother's voice would echo back to her, "Nobody gets to make you small." The decision point came on a Thursday in October. Daniel had hit her the night before, a backhanded slap that split her lip and left a vivid bruise across her cheekbone, because she'd bought the wrong brand of yogurt. He'd left for work at 6 a.m. without a word, and she'd gotten the kids off to school with her sunglasses on, claiming she had a migraine and the light hurt. But they needed groceries and she couldn't hide forever, and some stubborn part of her refused to let him trap her in the house in shame. So she'd put on makeup, more than usual, carefully applied concealer that didn't quite hide the damage, and driven to the Whole Foods on Capitol Hill. She'd walked through those sliding doors with her head down, her cart rattling, her heart pounding, telling herself she could do this. She could pretend to be normal for 30 minutes. She could shop for her family and go home and survive another day. That's all she had to do. Survive. The spark that would change everything was standing in the organic produce section, examining avocados with the intensity of a surgeon. Margaret didn't see her at first. She was focused on getting through her list, on not making eye contact with anyone who might notice the bruises, on moving through the world as invisibly as possible. But then this woman, tall and elegant in a navy suit with her dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun, turned and looked directly at Margaret. Really looked. And instead of glancing away politely, instead of pretending not to see, she held Margaret's gaze for a long moment. Then she walked over, stopping right in front of Margaret's cart, and said 6 words that would crack open the prison Margaret had been living in. "I'm a lawyer, and I can help." The woman's name was Victoria Reeves, and she was a partner at one of Seattle's most prominent family law firms. She specialized in domestic violence cases, particularly those involving financial abuse and coercive control. She'd seen hundreds of women like Margaret, educated, intelligent women trapped by economic dependency and psychological warfare. "I wasn't always a lawyer who did this work," Victoria said, her voice low but firm as they stood in that grocery store aisle. "My sister died 10 years ago. Her husband killed her, beat her to death in their kitchen while their kids were asleep upstairs. She'd tried to leave 3 times, but she didn't have the resources, the support, the legal protection she needed. So I became that protection for other women." Margaret's hand had gone to her throat instinctively, and Victoria had noticed. "How long has he been hitting you?" she asked. Margaret opened her mouth to deny it, but what came out instead was the truth. 2 years. But he's been killing me slowly for much longer than that. They talked for 45 minutes in Victoria's car in the parking lot. Margaret's ice cream melted in the trunk, but she didn't care. For the first time in years, someone was listening to her. Not just hearing words, but listening to the story beneath them. The pattern of abuse that had seemed so unique to Margaret, but that Victoria recognized as textbook coercive control. "He's isolated you, Victoria said, taking notes on a legal pad. He's made you financially dependent. He's convinced you that you're worthless and that leaving would be worse than staying. He's used your children as leverage, making you believe you couldn't support them alone. And he's physically abused you, which escalates the longer it continues. Margaret, I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear me. You are in danger. This doesn't get better. It only gets worse. The words should have terrified her, but instead, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years. Clarity. Someone was naming what was happening to her, giving it context, telling her it wasn't normal, wasn't her fault, wasn't something she had to endure. Victoria outlined a plan. First, documentation. Margaret needed to photograph every bruise, save every threatening text, record every incident in a journal with dates and times. Second, financial investigation. Victoria would hire a forensic accountant to trace all of Daniel's assets, accounts, and income. Third, preparation. Margaret needed to gather important documents, birth certificates, social security cards, passports, financial statements, and secure them outside the house. And fourth, when the time was right, they'd file for divorce, request an emergency protection order, and pursue criminal charges for domestic violence. He's going to fight you, Victoria warned. Men like him always do. They can't stand losing control. But I've done this hundreds of times, and I'm very good at my job. More importantly, you're going to discover you're much stronger than he's made you believe. Margaret had cried then, not tears of sadness, but of something like relief. The relief of having an ally, a plan, a way forward. Margaret's first small act of defiance came 3 days later. Daniel had texted her during the day, "Make reservations at Canlis for 7, client dinner. You're not invited, obviously." With no please, no thank you, just an order issued to staff. Normally, Margaret would have immediately called the restaurant, begged for a reservation, and spent the rest of the day anxious about whether she'd succeeded in pleasing him. But this time, she looked at the text, thought about Victoria's words. Every time you comply with an unreasonable demand, you reinforce his belief that he owns you. And she simply didn't respond. She didn't make the reservation. When Daniel called at 3 p.m., furious, demanding to know why the restaurant said they had no booking under his name, Margaret said calmly, "You told me to make a reservation. You didn't ask. I'm your wife, not your assistant." Then she hung up. Her hands shook so badly she had to sit down, adrenaline flooding her system. But underneath the fear was something else: exhilaration. The unexpected ally appeared in the form of their neighbor, Robert Martinez, a retired police officer who lived in the townhouse next door with his husband. Robert had always been friendly, the kind of neighbor who waved and made small talk about the weather, but Margaret had kept her distance, following Daniel's unspoken rule that they didn't fraternize with the neighbors. The day after the reservation incident, Robert knocked on her door at 10 a.m. "I heard shouting last night," he said carefully when Margaret answered. "Actually, I've heard shouting a lot of nights, and I've seen bruises you try to hide. Margaret, I was a cop for 30 years. I know what domestic violence looks like. If you need help..." Margaret had almost closed the door in his face, the instinct to protect Daniel, to protect her shame, overwhelming. But Robert held up his hand. "You don't have to say anything. But you should know that if I hear him hurting you, I will call 911. Not because I'm nosy, but because I didn't become a cop to stand by and let people get hurt when I could do something about it." Daniel's next attack was strategic and cruel. 2 weeks after Margaret's small rebellion, he sat her down at the kitchen table with a stack of papers. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice almost friendly. "This marriage isn't working. I want a divorce. But here's how it's going to go. You'll agree to joint custody, no alimony, and you'll leave with whatever you came into this marriage with, which, if I remember correctly, was about $20,000 in student loans and a used Honda. I keep the house, the investments, the kids' college funds. You'll get $500 a month in child support, and you'll be grateful for it." He slid the papers across to her. "Sign these, and we can do this civilly. Fight me, and I'll bury you. I'll get sole custody, claim you're an unfit mother. Depression, instability, weight problems indicate lack of self-control. You'll be lucky to get supervised visitation. Margaret looked at the papers, at his smug face, and felt something inside her snap. Not break, snap into place. She picked up the papers, looked him in the eye, and said, "No, you want a divorce. You'll get one, but not on your terms." The shock on his face was almost worth what came next. What came next was the worst beating yet. Daniel grabbed her by the hair and slammed her head against the refrigerator, screaming inches from her face. "You think you can say no to me? You think you have any power here? I own you. This house, those kids, the food you eat, the air you breathe, it's all mine." He punched her in the ribs and something cracked. Pain exploded through her chest. She curled into a ball on the floor and he kicked her once, twice, 3 times. Then, suddenly, he stopped. She looked up through tears and saw Emma standing in the doorway, home early from school, her face white with horror. "Dad," Emma whispered. Daniel's whole demeanor changed in an instant. "Your mother fell," he said smoothly. "She's so clumsy. Go to your room, sweetheart." But Emma didn't move. She looked at her mother on the floor, at her father standing over her, and Margaret saw the moment her daughter understood. Emma pulled out her phone and held it up. "I recorded it," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I heard you from the hallway, and I recorded the whole thing." That night, after Daniel left, fleeing the house in a panic after seeing the video, Margaret lay in bed unable to sleep, her body aching, her ribs wrapped in bandages. Robert had taken her to the ER, claiming she'd fallen, but giving her the name of a doctor who specialized in documenting assault injuries. She thought about her childhood, about the day the bullying at school had gotten so bad she'd tried to hide in the supply closet during lunch. A teacher, Mrs. Richardson, had found her crying and sat down beside her. "You know what bullies hate most?" Mrs. Richardson had asked. "When their victims refuse to disappear, when they stand up, speak up, and make noise. Silence is what protects them. Your voice is what protects you." Margaret had been too young to understand then, but lying in the dark with her broken rib throbbing, she finally got it. Her silence had protected Daniel for 2 years. Her voice would be the weapon that destroyed him. Victoria Reeves called the next morning. "Emma sent me the video," she said. "Margaret, this changes everything. We're filing today. Divorce petition, emergency protection order, and I'm forwarding the video to the prosecutor's office for criminal charges. Pack a bag for you and the kids. You're leaving that house today, and you're never going back as his wife." Margaret's first instinct was fear. Where would they go? How would they survive? But Victoria was already 10 steps ahead. "I have a client who runs a shelter for domestic violence survivors. It's not a traditional shelter. It's a network of safe houses, fully furnished apartments where women can stay while they rebuild their lives. You'll have your own space, security, counseling services, job placement help, and you won't pay a dime. As for Daniel, he'll be served with papers at his office this afternoon, and police will be escorting him to remove his belongings from the house under supervision. You and the kids get the house, Margaret. That's what the emergency order will specify. He's the danger, so he leaves." The story of her ally, Victoria, was rooted in tragedy, but channeled into purpose. 10 years ago, Victoria's younger sister, Rachel, had been a marketing executive, married to a doctor, living in a beautiful house in the suburbs. From the outside, Rachel's life looked perfect. But behind closed doors, her husband controlled every aspect of her existence: her money, her friendships, her movement. When Rachel tried to leave, he'd threatened to use his medical connections to have her declared mentally unfit to take their children, to ruin her professionally. Rachel had believed him because he was a doctor, and she was just a marketing person. She'd believed him because he'd spent years convincing her she was unstable, irrational, too emotional. The day she'd finally packed her bags to leave, he'd killed her, pushed her down the stairs, and then called 911, claiming she'd fallen. He might have gotten away with it too, except Rachel had been keeping a journal hidden in her mother's house, documenting years of abuse. Victoria had found it after the funeral. She'd been a corporate lawyer at the time, making 6 figures defending companies in contract disputes. She quit the next week and went back to school for family law. "I'm not doing this just for Rachel," Victoria had told Margaret. "I'm doing it for every woman who thinks she's trapped. You're not trapped. You're just in a cage someone else built. And I'm really good at dismantling cages." Margaret practiced finding her voice in small ways. She called the bank and asked about the accounts in her and Daniel's names, writing down balances and account numbers. She made an appointment with her doctor and got documentation of her injuries, specifically requesting that the notes indicate they were consistent with physical assault. She went to the children's school and updated the emergency contact information, listing Victoria as the person to call if Daniel tried to pick them up. She changed her voicemail to say simply, "This is Margaret Chen. Leave a message and I'll return your call if I choose to." That tiny assertion of agency, "if I choose to," felt revolutionary. Every small act of self-advocacy was practice for the larger battle coming. Victoria had told her, "Daniel has spent years training you to be silent, compliant, and afraid. We're going to retrain you to be loud, assertive, and strategic. Your voice is a muscle. We're going to make it strong." The community awareness began slowly, then spread like wildfire. Robert, the retired cop next door, had apparently been more observant than Margaret realized. He'd kept his own documentation, a log of dates and times when he'd heard shouting, seen Margaret with suspicious injuries, watched Daniel leave at odd hours. When Victoria filed the protection order, Robert submitted a witness statement that was devastatingly detailed. Then Emma's video got out, not publicly, but among Daniel's colleagues, leaked by someone in the prosecutor's office who wanted his employer to know what kind of man they'd promoted to senior vice president. Daniel's carefully constructed image began to crumble. Neighbors who'd thought he was charming started sharing their own observations. The way he spoke dismissively about his wife at block parties, the young women they'd seen him with, the time he'd screamed at Margaret in the driveway over a parking spot. The community had been watching all along, Margaret realized. They'd just needed permission to say what they'd seen. Victoria's team uncovered Daniel's critical weakness. His arrogance had made him sloppy. The forensic accountant found evidence of him moving marital assets into accounts under his girlfriend's name. Financial fraud. They found emails where he discussed managing Margaret's access to money with his brother. Evidence of financial abuse and conspiracy. Most damning, they found a life insurance policy he'd taken out on Margaret 6 months ago with himself as the sole beneficiary. $1 million. When Victoria saw that policy, she looked up from the documents with fire in her eyes. He wasn't just abusing you, Margaret. He was planning your death. Whether he knew it consciously or not, he was setting the stage to benefit from your murder. This man is dangerous, and we're going to make sure he never gets close to you or your children again. Margaret's bold plan crystallized. She would not just escape Daniel, she would dismantle him. Working with Victoria, she prepared a comprehensive filing that included the divorce petition, custody motion, restraining order, and a civil suit for assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraud. They would demand sole custody of the children, all marital property, full reimbursement for the income she'd sacrificed during their marriage, and damages for the physical and psychological harm he'd caused. "You're going to walk away with everything," Victoria promised. "The house, the investments, his retirement accounts, child support and spousal support that will actually let you rebuild your life. He's going to walk away with nothing but legal bills and a criminal record. That's justice." Margaret felt the weight of it. Not just the fear of what Daniel would do, but the power of what she was about to do. She wasn't running away. She was burning his kingdom to the ground. The final preparation happened on a Sunday evening. Victoria came to the house with her paralegal, and they spent 4 hours preparing Margaret for what was coming. They role-played the confrontation, with Victoria playing Daniel, throwing every manipulative tactic, every threat, every insult. "You're fat and worthless, and no one will want you," Victoria snarled, channeling the abuse Margaret had endured. The kids will hate you for destroying this family. You'll end up alone and broke. Margaret practiced responding with calm, factual statements. I am ending a marriage to an abuser. My children will understand when they're older. I will be financially secure because I'm entitled to my share of our marital assets. They practiced until Margaret could deliver those lines without her voice shaking, without tears, without the apologetic tone she'd developed over 15 years. When they finished, Victoria hugged her. "Tomorrow, we go to war," she said. "And tomorrow, you're going to discover you're a warrior." The confrontation began at 2 p.m. on a Monday. Daniel was served with papers at his office by a process server who arrived during a senior staff meeting. The entire executive team watched as Daniel read the documents, his face going from confusion to shock to rage. Petition for dissolution of marriage, emergency protection order, notice of criminal investigation, motion for temporary custody and exclusive use of the marital residence, notification of asset freeze. Margaret had timed it perfectly. Public humiliation in the place where his ego was most invested, in front of the people whose respect he craved most. One of Daniel's colleagues later told Victoria that Daniel had actually screamed right there in the conference room, "That fat bitch can't do this to me." His CEO had responded coolly, "Mr. Chen, perhaps you should take the rest of the day off, and the rest of the week actually, while HR reviews this situation." Daniel showed up at the house at 4 p.m., violating the protection order within 2 hours of being served. But Margaret was ready. Victoria had arranged for 2 police officers to be parked across the street, waiting. The moment Daniel pulled into the driveway, they were out of their car. He never made it to the front door. Margaret watched from the living room window as he argued with the officers, gesturing wildly, pointing at the house, clearly saying it was his home and he had every right to be there. But the protection order was clear. He was to stay at least 500 feet away from Margaret and the children. The officers gave him a choice: leave immediately or be arrested for violating a court order. Daniel looked up at the house, saw Margaret standing in the window, and his face contorted with such rage that she actually stepped back. Then he got in his car and peeled out, tires screeching. One of the officers came to the door. "We'll be doing regular patrols," he said. "If he comes back, call 911 immediately. Do not engage with him." The confrontation went public 3 days later at the courthouse for the emergency hearing. Margaret walked into that courtroom with Victoria beside her, wearing a navy dress she'd bought specifically for this day, not to please anyone, but because it made her feel strong, professional, worthy. Daniel was there with his own lawyer, a slick corporate attorney who specialized in protecting wealthy men from unreasonable ex-wives. The courtroom was packed. Victoria had made sure the local legal community knew about this case, and domestic violence advocates filled the gallery. The judge, a 60-year-old woman named Ellen Yao, known for her no-nonsense approach to family law, called the case, and then Victoria stood up and began Margaret's truth. She presented Emma's video first. The courtroom fell silent as Daniel's voice, distorted by phone speakers but unmistakable, screamed about owning Margaret, punctuated by the sickening sounds of violence. Then came the medical records, the photographs of bruises, the witness statements, the financial records showing systematic theft of marital assets. Margaret took the witness stand at Victoria's urging, though every instinct screamed to hide. "Tell the court about your marriage," Victoria prompted gently, and Margaret spoke. Her voice shook at first, but as she continued, it grew stronger. She described the years of psychological abuse, the erosion of her self-worth, the affairs Daniel flaunted, the escalating violence. She described living in fear, tiptoeing through her own home, sacrificing her career and identity to raise their children while he built his empire with her unpaid labor. "He made me believe I was worthless because I gained weight," Margaret said, looking directly at the judge. "He convinced me that my body was a failure, that I was lucky he tolerated me, that I deserved the way he treated me. But sitting here now, I understand that the only failure was his. He failed as a husband, as a father, and as a human being, and I refuse to let him fail my children any further. Daniel's lawyer tried to fight back, arguing that Margaret was exaggerating, that she was an unreliable witness, that the video could have been taken out of context. But Victoria had anticipated every argument. She presented the pattern of abuse, cited legal precedent, and most effectively, she called Emma to testify. The judge hesitated. Emma was only 14, but Victoria argued that Emma's testimony was crucial. Emma took the stand, looked at her father and said, "I used to think my dad was a hero, but heroes don't hurt people they're supposed to love. Heroes don't make their wives cry themselves to sleep. Heroes don't teach their sons that women are objects and their daughters that they should accept being treated like garbage. My dad isn't a hero. He's a villain, and I'm not afraid to say it anymore." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Daniel's lawyer looked at his client and seemed to deflate, realizing the case was already lost. The physical moment of Margaret holding her ground came when the judge called a brief recess. In the hallway, Daniel cornered Margaret by the bathrooms, his lawyer mysteriously absent. "You're destroying me," he hissed, "taking everything I worked for, turning my own daughter against me. When this is over, you'll be sorry. You'll wish you'd stayed quiet." Margaret looked at this man who'd terrorized her for years, this man who'd made her feel small and broken, and she felt nothing. No fear, no love, no connection at all. "Daniel," she said calmly, "I already was sorry. Sorry I married you. Sorry I wasted 15 years. Sorry I let you convince me I was anything less than worthy of respect. But I'm not sorry anymore. I'm angry, and my anger is going to cost you everything." Robert Martinez, who'd been standing nearby, stepped between them. The lady said what she needed to say. Walk away. Daniel looked like he wanted to fight, but realized there were courthouse security guards watching. He walked away, and Margaret realized her hands weren't even shaking. As others began to support Margaret publicly, the tide turned into a tsunami. Daniel's company put him on administrative leave pending investigation. They'd discovered he'd been using company resources to conduct his affairs, booking hotel rooms on his corporate card. His affair partners started coming forward with their own stories of how he'd lied to them, told them his wife was mentally ill, promised he was getting divorced. One woman revealed he'd given her a bracelet she later discovered had been a gift Margaret received for her 40th birthday. He'd literally stolen from his wife to impress his mistress. The social circle he'd carefully cultivated, the networking contacts he'd impressed, the parents from the kids' school, all of them began to distance themselves. His reputation, which he'd valued above everything, was systematically destroyed by the truth Margaret was finally allowed to tell. Daniel's lawyer tried one more manipulative tactic, standing up in court and arguing that Margaret's weight gain indicated an eating disorder, that her inability to maintain her appearance showed lack of self-control that extended to other areas of life, that she might not be mentally stable enough for sole custody. It was a desperate, disgusting move, and Victoria was ready for it. "Your Honor," Victoria said, her voice cutting, "opposing counsel has just demonstrated exactly the kind of fat-phobic, misogynistic abuse my client has endured throughout this marriage. My client's body size is medically healthy and, more importantly, is completely irrelevant to her fitness as a parent or her right to safety in her own home. What is relevant is that opposing counsel's client committed assault and battery against her, stole marital assets, and has demonstrated he's a danger to his family. My client's appearance is not on trial here. His crimes are." Judge Yao agreed, and her ruling was swift and comprehensive. "Mr. Chen," she said, looking directly at Daniel with undisguised contempt, "in 30 years on the bench, I've seen many cases of domestic violence, but few where the abuser was so arrogant, so entitled, and so thoroughly deserving of the consequences about to befall him. I'm granting the protection order for 5 years, renewable. I'm awarding temporary sole custody to Mrs. Chen with no visitation for you, pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. I'm granting Mrs. Chen exclusive use of the marital home, sole access to all marital accounts, and I'm ordering you to pay temporary spousal and child support in the amount of $15,000 per month. If you violate this order in any way, you will be arrested immediately. Do you understand? Daniel looked like he'd been punched. This is a railroad job, he sputtered. My own house. Judge Yao cut him off. It ceased being your house when you turned it into a crime scene. Court is adjourned. The unexpected plot twist came 2 days after the hearing. Victoria's paralegal, doing a final sweep of the forensic accounting, discovered something explosive. Daniel had a second family, not affair partners, an actual second family. 3 years ago, he'd fathered a child with a woman in Portland and had been financially supporting them, paying for an apartment, giving them money for living expenses, all with marital funds. The woman, Julie, had no idea Daniel was married. He told her he was divorced, traveling constantly for work. Victoria immediately added fraud and bigamy-adjacent deception to the civil suit. But more importantly, Julie, when contacted and told the truth, agreed to testify about Daniel's lies, his pattern of manipulation, and his financial setup. He told me he was falling in love with me, Julie told Victoria, crying. He said I was everything he'd ever wanted. Then I find out I'm one of many, and his actual wife had no idea any of us existed. He's a monster. The power shift was complete when the criminal prosecutor filed formal charges. 3 counts of domestic violence assault, 1 count of felony fraud, and multiple counts of violating protection orders. Daniel had tried to contact Margaret through fake social media accounts, traced back to him by a savvy detective. The prosecutor, a tough woman named Sandra Park, called Victoria. This case is a slam dunk, she said. The video alone would convict him, but with all the corroborating evidence, the financial crimes, the pattern of abuse, he's looking at real prison time. His lawyer is already calling about a plea deal. Victoria asked what kind of deal. 5 years, minimum. He serves at least 3. And he agrees to give up all custody rights, all claims to marital property. He walks away with nothing but his freedom, eventually, and even that's conditional on good behavior. Victoria relayed this to Margaret, who felt something she hadn't felt in years: vindication. Daniel's fall accelerated rapidly. His company fired him, citing moral turpitude and misuse of company resources. His professional network evaporated. No one in Seattle's tech community wanted to be associated with him. His own brother, who'd helped him hide assets, got scared and agreed to testify against him in exchange for immunity. His affair partners all refused to support him publicly. His legal bills mounted as his assets were frozen. He went from being a wealthy, respected executive to being a criminal defendant, living in a studio apartment, facing prison, social exile, and financial ruin. And Margaret, who'd spent 15 years as his victim, was the architect of his destruction. Every lie he'd told was exposed. Every crime he'd committed was documented. Every person he'd manipulated saw him clearly. Margaret had done what he'd always told her was impossible. She'd made him nothing. The final confrontation came at a settlement meeting 6 weeks later. Daniel, gaunt and desperate, sat across the table from Margaret. His lawyer had advised him to accept Victoria's terms. He would plead guilty to all charges, serve his sentence, give up all custody rights, surrender all marital property except his retirement account, which would be split 70-30 in Margaret's favor, and agree to never contact Margaret or the children again. In exchange, Margaret wouldn't pursue additional civil damages beyond what was in the divorce settlement. "This is blackmail," Daniel said weakly. Victoria smiled. "No, Mr. Chen, this is consequences. Sign the papers or we go to trial, and I assure you the jury will be even less sympathetic than Judge Yao was." Daniel looked at Margaret, really looked at her, and seemed to see her for the first time in years. "I loved you once," he said. Margaret leaned forward. "No, you didn't. You loved controlling me. But I don't need your love anymore. I don't need anything from you except your signature on those papers and your permanent absence from my life." He signed. The consequences settled over Margaret's life like snow, quiet, transformative, making everything look different. The first week after the settlement, she walked through her house now, legally and completely hers, and felt like she was seeing it for the first time. Without Daniel's presence, the space felt bigger, lighter, like she could finally breathe. She stood in the master bedroom where he'd hurt her so many times and made a decision. She was redecorating everything. New paint, new furniture, new everything. She would exorcise his ghost from every corner of this house and make it a home for her and her children. The first thing she did was take down the full-length mirror he'd hung in the bedroom, the one positioned so she'd have to see herself every time she dressed, the one he'd used as a tool of criticism. She carried it to the garage and, with a satisfaction that surprised her, smashed it with a hammer. 7 years of good luck, she thought, counting forward. New opportunities appeared almost immediately, as if the universe had been waiting for her to step into her power. A former colleague from her advertising days saw a news article about the case and reached out. "Margaret, I had no idea what you were going through," she wrote, "but I'm now creative director at a major firm, and I'm looking for senior strategists. You were brilliant 12 years ago. I can't imagine you've gotten worse. Would you consider coming in for an interview?" Margaret's first instinct was to decline, to list all the reasons she wasn't qualified. She'd been out of the field for 14 years. The industry had changed. She was too old, too rusty, too everything. But then she heard Victoria's voice in her head. "You've been running a household, managing a budget, coordinating schedules, negotiating conflicts, and surviving psychological warfare. Those are executive-level skills. Any company would be lucky to have you." So Margaret said yes. She invested in herself in ways she'd forgotten were possible. She used part of the settlement money to hire a therapist who specialized in trauma and abuse recovery. Dr. Sarah Kim was a round, warm woman in her 50s who greeted Margaret at their first session by saying, "First rule of this office, your body is not a topic of judgment, improvement, or discussion unless you want it to be. You're here to heal your mind, not to shrink your body." Margaret had cried with relief. In their sessions, they unpacked 15 years of conditioning, identified the patterns of abuse, and worked on rebuilding Margaret's sense of self. "You're not broken," Dr. Kim told her. "You were systematically broken down by someone who benefited from your low self-esteem. But you were never actually broken. You were bent. And now we're going to help you straighten back out on your own terms." Margaret's physical transformation had nothing to do with weight loss, and everything to do with reclaiming her body as her own. She started taking yoga classes, not to lose weight, but because she'd always loved yoga before Daniel had made comments about fat women in yoga pants being a public nuisance. She bought clothes that fit her current body and that she actually liked, instead of the oversized, shapeless things she'd hidden in for years. She got a haircut from a high-end stylist who asked what she wanted, instead of telling her what would be flattering for her face shape. She started wearing bold colors again, reds and purples and bright blues, instead of the blacks and grays that Daniel had insisted were slimming. She looked in the mirror and practiced saying, "I am beautiful," until it stopped feeling like a lie. She took up space without apologizing. She ate food without shame. She moved her body for joy instead of punishment. She existed in her skin like it was her home, not her enemy. Her voice grew in ways that astonished even her. The advertising firm had not only hired her, but promoted her to senior creative strategist within 3 months, impressed by her insight, her leadership, and her ability to mentor younger employees. She found herself speaking up in meetings, pitching bold ideas, advocating for her vision. She joined a support group for domestic violence survivors and started sharing her story, helping other women recognize their own worth. She gave a talk at a local women's shelter about rebuilding after abuse, standing in front of 50 women and saying, "I want you to know that leaving is possible, starting over is possible, and thriving is possible. I'm not special. I was just fed up enough and lucky enough to meet the right people at the right time. If I can do this, you can too." Gyun, The standing ovation made her cry, but they were good tears, cleansing tears. Daniel's current state was exactly what he deserved. He pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He would serve a minimum of 3 years and would be on probation for 5 years after release, with no contact orders in place. His career was over. No tech company would touch him after the publicity. His social standing was obliterated. His family had largely disowned him, his brother especially angry about being dragged into the legal mess. Julie, the woman in Portland, had full custody of their daughter and had legally changed the child's last name to her own. Daniel had lost everything: his home, his money, his children, his freedom, his reputation. Margaret felt no sympathy. She'd spent years suffering at his hands. Now it was his turn to suffer the consequences of his choices. A subplot developed that Margaret hadn't expected: romance, or rather the possibility of it. Robert Martinez, the retired cop neighbor who'd been so instrumental in her escape, had become a genuine friend over the months. He and his husband Carlos often invited Margaret and the kids over for dinner, creating a chosen family dynamic that felt healing. Through them, Margaret met their friend James, a divorced father of 2 who was a high school English teacher. James was gentle, funny, about 40 pounds overweight himself, and completely uninterested in changing anyone's body, including his own. Their first conversation was about books, their second about parenting, their third about healing from difficult relationships. There was no pressure, no expectation, just ease. He never commented on her appearance except once, when she wore a purple dress to a dinner party, and he said simply, "That color is spectacular on you. You look happy." Not beautiful, not attractive, happy. It was the best compliment she'd ever received. She faced a new challenge when Emma started acting out at school, fighting with classmates, skipping classes, grades dropping. Margaret's first instinct was panic. She was failing as a mother. Daniel would have been right about her inability to parent alone. She'd ruined her daughter's life by leaving. But Dr. Kim helped her reframe. Emma witnessed years of abuse, then witnessed her mother's transformation, recorded evidence that sent her father to prison, and testified against him in court. She's 14 years old and processing trauma. She's not broken. She's dealing with something incredibly difficult, the only way she knows how. Margaret got Emma into therapy with a counselor who specialized in teens affected by domestic violence. Together, they started healing, learning to communicate, rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of secrets. Margaret had a moment of doubt when the divorce was finally officially finalized. She stood in the courthouse, holding the decree, and felt a wave of unexpected grief. Not for Daniel. She didn't miss him at all, but for the woman she'd been when she married him. The hopeful 27-year-old who'd believed in love and partnership and happily ever after. That woman was gone, and Margaret mourned her, but Dr. Kim had prepared her for this. "You're allowed to grieve," her therapist had said. "Grieve the life you thought you'd have. Grieve the years you lost. Grieve the innocence that was taken, and then let it go. Because that grief is the last thing he gets from you. After this, you're free." So Margaret stood on the courthouse steps, held the decree up to the sky, and said out loud, "I'm free." Then she went home to her children, to her new career, to her friends, to her life. She was free. She remembered her journey late one night, unable to sleep, sitting in her living room with tea. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, afraid, broken, convinced she deserved the abuse because of her body. She thought about the grocery store parking lot conversation with Victoria that changed everything. She thought about finding her voice, about Emma's courage, about Robert's intervention, about every person who'd seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. She thought about Daniel in prison, about the house that was now hers, about the job she loved, about Mason and Lily sleeping peacefully upstairs, about Emma in therapy working through her pain, about James texting her goodnight messages that made her smile. She'd gone from victim to survivor to thriver. She'd learned that her body was not her enemy, that her voice was her power, that her worth was not determined by anyone else's judgment. She'd learned that leaving is hard, but staying is deadly, that healing is possible but not easy, that transformation requires courage, but courage can be learned. Margaret achieved an important milestone the day her company landed a major campaign she'd pitched, a body-positive clothing line for women of all sizes. She'd presented the strategy with passion, arguing that women were tired of being told to hide, shrink, and apologize for their bodies. What if, she'd pitched, we sold clothes to women by celebrating them exactly as they are, not as they used to be, not as they will be when they lose weight, but as they are right now, today, in all their glorious, diverse, beautiful reality. The client loved it. The campaign went viral. Margaret's career exploded. She was interviewed on podcasts, featured in marketing magazines, invited to speak at conferences. And through it all, she used her platform to talk about more than advertising. She talked about abuse, about the intersection of misogyny and fat phobia, about how women's bodies are weaponized against them, about the importance of believing survivors. She became the person who could have helped her 2 years ago. She became her own hero. She'd become someone who helped others, but more than that, she'd become someone who helped herself. She set boundaries without guilt. She said no without over-explaining. She asked for what she needed without apologizing. She existed in the world as a person of value, taking up space, speaking up, refusing to be diminished. Her children saw it too. Mason, now 12, told her one day, "Mom, you're so much cooler now than you used to be." She'd asked what he meant, and he said, "You smile more. You laugh. You're like happy. It's nice." Lily, 9 years old, had started drawing pictures of strong women, always with big arms, big legs, big smiles, taking up the whole page. And Emma, in a breakthrough therapy session, had told Margaret, "I used to think you were weak for staying with Dad, but now I understand you were strong for protecting us until you could get us out safely. You're the bravest person I know." Margaret had that drawing from Lily framed in her office next to Emma's words written on a card, next to a photo of Mason hugging her at his baseball game. Reminders that she'd done it. She'd saved them all. The moment of victory came 18 months after the divorce was finalized. Margaret stood on the stage at Seattle's Convention Center, speaking to an audience of 3,000 people at the National Domestic Violence Awareness Conference. She'd been invited as a keynote speaker specifically because her case had garnered so much attention and because her transformation had been so complete. She wore a burgundy suit that hugged her curves, her hair styled confidently, her voice clear and strong as it echoed through the auditorium. "I'm standing here today not as someone who survived abuse, but as someone who conquered it," she said. "For 15 years, I believed I was worthless because of my body. My husband convinced me that I deserved his violence because I'd gained weight after having his children. He made me believe that my body was a failure, and therefore I was a failure. But I want every person in this room to hear this truth. Your body is not your worth. Your body is your home, and no one, no partner, no parent, no society has the right to make you feel like you should apologize for existing in it." The applause was thunderous, but Margaret wasn't finished. She told her story, all of it. The abuse, the fear, the moment in the grocery store, the legal battle, the victory. And when she finished, 3,000 people rose to their feet. Daniel's final appearance in Margaret's story came 6 months after his release from prison. He'd served 3 years and been released on good behavior, though his life outside prison was barely better than his life inside. He was living in a halfway house, working as a night manager at a warehouse, completely ostracized from his former life. He'd apparently been following Margaret's rising profile, her keynote speeches, her successful career, the feature article about her in Seattle magazine titled "From Victim to Victor: How Margaret Chen Rebuilt Her Life." He'd violated his no-contact order by sending her a letter through his parole officer, requesting a meeting. Victoria had advised against it. but Margaret had decided she wanted to see him one last time. They met in a supervised setting at the parole office, with Victoria present and a parole officer in the room. Daniel looked older, diminished, his expensive suits replaced by thrift store clothes, his confident swagger gone. He'd gained weight himself, ironically, and looked uncomfortable in his own skin. Margaret offered no grace, because grace was not owed to unrepentant abusers, and Daniel had not earned forgiveness. He started to speak, to say he'd been going through a hard time when he'd hurt her, that he'd been under a lot of stress, that maybe they could find a way to co-parent civilly now that time had passed. Margaret held up her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Daniel, I didn't come here to give you absolution or to reopen any doors. I came here to close this chapter completely. You spent 15 years trying to destroy me because you couldn't control your own insecurities, your own cruelty, your own emptiness. You failed. I'm successful. I'm happy. I'm whole. My children are thriving without you. I have rebuilt my life into something you could never diminish. You, on the other hand, have lost everything, and that is exactly what you deserve. I don't forgive you. I don't wish you well. I simply don't think about you at all anymore. You're irrelevant to my life now. You always should have been." She stood up, looked at Victoria, and said, "We're done here." They left Daniel sitting there, his face a mixture of shock and impotent rage, and Margaret never looked back. Her reflection on the journey came during a weekend retreat with her support group. 12 women who'd all escaped abusive relationships and met monthly to share their ongoing healing. They'd rented a cabin in the San Juan Islands, and on Saturday night, they sat around a fire sharing their stories. When it was Margaret's turn, she said, "I learned that the abuse was never about my body. It was about power. Daniel used my body as a weapon against me because it was an easy target in a society that already tells women they're not good enough. But the truth is, even if I'd been thin, he would have found something else to criticize, to control, to use to break me down. Because that's what abusers do. They find your vulnerability and exploit it. My vulnerability was that I believed my worth was tied to my appearance, but I learned that my worth is inherent, inalienable, and has nothing to do with my weight, my face, or anyone else's opinion. I learned that I'm valuable because I'm human, because I'm kind, because I love my children, because I work hard, because I exist. That's enough. That's always been enough." Margaret's new life was firmly established and thriving beyond what she'd imagined possible. She'd been promoted to executive creative director at her firm, leading a team of 20 strategists and earning a salary that dwarfed what Daniel had ever allowed her to access. She'd bought a second property, a beach house on Whidbey Island, where she and the kids spent weekends swimming and kayaking and building bonfires. Emma was now 16 and thriving in therapy, president of her school's feminist club, planning to study social work in college. Mason was 13, sweet and thoughtful, who'd told Margaret recently, "I'm never going to treat my partner the way Dad treated you. You showed me what that does to people." Lily was 10, confident and bold, who announced she wanted to be a lawyer like Aunt Victoria when she grew up. Margaret's relationship with James had deepened into something real and healthy. They'd been dating for a year, taking it slow, building a foundation of friendship and respect. He'd never once commented on her body except to appreciate it, and he modeled for her what healthy love looked like: supportive, equal, kind. She'd inspired countless others through her advocacy work. Margaret had started a non-profit called Second Chapter that provided free legal services, therapy, and job training to domestic violence survivors trying to rebuild their lives. Victoria served on the board and donated her time. Robert and Carlos volunteered as community liaisons. James taught resume writing workshops. Emma volunteered answering crisis hotline calls. The organization had helped over 200 women in its first year, and the local news had featured Margaret's work extensively. She received emails weekly from women who'd heard her story and found the courage to leave their abusers. "You showed me it was possible," they wrote. "You gave me hope when I had none." Margaret answered every single email personally, offering encouragement and resources. She remembered what it felt like to believe escape was impossible, and she would never ignore someone reaching out from that darkness. Her body was now celebrated, not by others' standards, but by her own. She'd done a photo shoot for the body-positive clothing campaign she'd created, and the images showed her laughing, dancing, running on the beach with her children, sitting confidently in a boardroom. She was curvy, strong, present, alive. The campaign's tagline was, "This is what power looks like," and Margaret embodied it completely. She'd given interviews about body acceptance, saying, "I spent 15 years apologizing for my body, trying to shrink it, hide it, make it acceptable to someone who was determined to hate it. Now I celebrate it. These arms hug my children. These legs carry me through my day. This body survived trauma and carried 3 babies and keeps going when everything else tried to stop it. This body is a miracle, not a problem. And I'm done apologizing for taking up space in the world." The interviews had gone viral, touching millions of women who'd been waiting for permission to love themselves. The full circle moment happened on a Tuesday morning, 2 years after leaving Daniel. Margaret walked into the same Whole Foods where Victoria had first approached her. She was there to buy ingredients for Emma's birthday dinner, feeling happy and relaxed in jeans and a bright yellow sweater. As she reached for avocados in the produce section, the exact spot where Victoria had stood that day, she heard a voice behind her. "Excuse me." Margaret turned to see a young woman, maybe 25, with a black eye poorly hidden by makeup and a tremor in her hands. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, "but are you Margaret Chen? I saw your keynote speech online." Margaret's heart squeezed. "I am," she said gently. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "My boyfriend, he says things about my weight, and sometimes I don't know what to do. I don't have anywhere to go." Margaret set down her basket, pulled out her phone, and called Victoria right there. "I have someone who needs you," she said. Then she turned to the young woman and said the words Victoria had once said to her. "I'm going to help you. You're not alone anymore." Margaret had changed the system in tangible ways. Working with local legislators, she'd helped pass a law requiring domestic violence training for all family court judges and mandating that economic abuse be considered in custody and property division decisions. She testified before the state legislature about the intersections of financial abuse, body shaming, and domestic violence, helping lawmakers understand that abuse isn't just physical, it's a systematic pattern of control that uses whatever tools are available, including societal prejudices about women's bodies. The law passed unanimously and was being used as a model in other states. Margaret had also worked with the Seattle Police Department to improve their response to domestic violence calls, training officers to recognize economic abuse and coercive control as seriously as physical violence. The police chief had personally thanked her, saying, "You've helped us see what we were missing. We're better at our jobs because of your advocacy." Her final encounter with her ally, Victoria, was full of gratitude and recognition of their journey together. They met for lunch at a waterfront restaurant, celebrating the 2nd anniversary of Margaret's divorce being finalized. Victoria raised her glass and said, "To the bravest client I've ever had." Margaret shook her head. "To the lawyer who saw me when I was invisible, who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, who gave me back my life." Victoria's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Margaret, you did the hard part. I just held the door open. You're the one who walked through it." They talked about the women they'd helped together, the cases Victoria was working on, the expansion plans for second chapter. Then Victoria said something Margaret would never forget. "My sister Rachel died because she didn't have someone to help her escape. But every woman you help, every life you save through your advocacy, that's Rachel's legacy too. You're saving the women she couldn't be here to save. Thank you for that." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed Victoria's hand. "We're saving them together." Margaret's new dream and mission crystallized into something concrete and powerful. She wanted to create a national network of safe house sponsors, wealthy individuals who would purchase properties specifically to house domestic violence survivors rent-free for up to 2 years while they rebuilt their lives. She'd already secured commitments from 5 tech executives, women who'd made fortunes and wanted to use their wealth meaningfully, to purchase properties in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Phoenix. The vision was ambitious: 100 houses in 50 cities within 5 years, housing over 500 families. She was writing a book about her experience and donating all proceeds to the initiative. She'd been approached by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell her story and the stories of other survivors. Margaret's mission was clear. She would spend the rest of her life making sure no woman felt as trapped as she once had, making sure resources existed, making sure silence was no longer the only option. She turned her pain into purpose, her trauma into transformation, her victimization into victory, and she was just getting started. Margaret Chen walked out of that grocery store 2 years ago, believing she was worthless, broken, and trapped forever. Today, she runs a multi-million-dollar nonprofit, leads creative strategy for a major firm, raises 3 incredible children, and spends her time dismantling the systems that protect abusers and silence victims. Her transformation wasn't about changing her body. It was about changing her mind about her body, about her worth, about her power. She stopped apologizing for existing and started celebrating that existence. She stopped accepting crumbs and started demanding the feast. She stopped being small and started taking up all the space she deserved. Daniel tried to destroy her, but instead he forged her into something unbreakable. Your body is not your limitation. It's your vessel for living a full, powerful, authentic life. Your voice matters more than anyone's opinion of you. Your story doesn't end when someone tries to write you out of it. Margaret's story is proof that leaving is possible, that rebuilding is possible, that thriving is possible. You are not trapped. You are not worthless. You are not alone. If Margaret could go from being beaten in her kitchen to being celebrated on international stages, you can overcome whatever is holding you back from the life you deserve. Your second chapter is waiting. You just have to be brave enough to turn the page. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about strength and survival, leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of women who refuse to be broken, who turn their pain into power, and who prove that the only person who gets to define your worth is you. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story of transformation and triumph. Remember, you are enough exactly as you are right now in this moment. And anyone who tells you otherwise is speaking their insecurity, not your truth. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, be loud, be proud, and take up space unapologetically.